All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Future Fields. We are going to kick it off here with Future Fields Farm and Ranch. And it's my pleasure to introduce this panel. We have David Cary, the founder of HighGround Ranch Developers. He's got a little crowd here. We love it. He has over 35 years of accounting, finance, wealth management, and capital markets experience. He began his career with an early-stage company as the first full-time accounting employee of a computer software retailer that pioneered the computer superstore concept and eventually IPO'd. And over the next 30 years since then, he's spent time in financial services with one of the world's largest investment banks in the world, trading equities, futures, and options. He then transitioned to assisting entrepreneurial families and C-level executives with wealth management. A visionary of what could be and a team builder for what will be, he founded Cary Impact Advisors to assemble massive projects in rewirement from his previous career. So we're very excited to have David with us. We also have Scott Massey, founder and CEO of Anew. He was on Forbes 30 Under 30, a Purdue University mechanical engineering technology graduate, and a health and wellness brand, founder of Anew, which is a health and wellness brand revolutionizing controlled environment agriculture with his innovative rotary aeroponics technology to empower communities to sustainably grow pure produce. And we have Bart Womack, the CEO of Eat and Grow Systems. We're going to let Bart give you a little backstory on himself when he gets started. And moderating this fine panel is Logan Brown, a partner with Ride West Marketing. She grew up barrel racing with her mother and competing in junior high rodeos and North Texas barrel races. And during her time in college, had the opportunity to do live broadcasting for SEC Network. She played collegiate volleyball for the University of Arkansas and Mississippi State. She's led marketing and partnership efforts for Equine Health Solutions, and probably one of the coolest cowgirls I think around that I know for sure. So we're very excited for this panel. Before we get started, I do want to give a shout out to Kathy May, who is here with us in the room with American Wind Power. And these are turbines. They're down in the atrium for farms and ranches. Huge supporter for EarthX, and this day could not be possible without her and American Wind Power. So we're very grateful to have you here, Kathy. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it to Logan to get this panel started.
Thank you, Leah. I hope you all are doing fantastic today. So before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of things here, I wanted you all to get a really unique perspective of how each one of these gentlemen got started and how the evolution of each one of their companies came about. So David, I'm going to kick it off with you to give a little bit of that backstory and the more fine details that maybe most people won't get to know.
Sure. So you heard my background is wealth management. In the last 8 years, I was at Morgan Stanley. I was with a private wealth team. That was working with the ultra-affluent families. So we had access to a variety of capital. We saw what they were doing with their personal assets. We saw what they did with their philanthropic assets. We helped with the business resources, finance the growth, protect the value, liquefy it, and do it all over again if that's what they want. We interacted with the corporate finance, investment banking. So I've seen capital from many angles. And I realized probably about 7 or 8 years ago that if you are aligning a cause with your business, or better yet, integrating the cause into your business model, you have access to a wider variety of capital, and thus more capital. And so I decided to pursue something big. I didn't know what it was. And so I started a search, and I realized over about a 2-year period that what we are doing to the land with the way we're growing food is hurting the land, it's hurting the consumer, and the people who grow it, they don't make enough money. And so I started exploring that, and where do we fix it? And farming is hard to fix. We can get into ranching where you can get the profitability going quicker. And so what we focused in on is the larger ranches. We're launching a network of ranches that will hold a minimum of 2,000 head of cattle. At that point, you can hit profitability faster, but then you can also start working with the bigger suppliers and the bigger buyers who can't work with these smaller regenerative ranches. How's that?
That's fantastic. So the name of the game for David here is bigger is better. You will see kind of across our panel, there's going to be some differences. So for Scott, and we'll kind of let you get into it, but definitely it is a quality over quantity kind of a measurement on the scale side of things. But for David, bigger is better. So trying to quantify that for everybody to understand the perspective of what these gentlemen are trying to do. Scott, I'll let you kind of get into your side of things and show your perspective on this.
Thank you, Logan, and good morning. I'm Scott Massey, co-founder, CEO of Anew. My career began working in the oil and natural gas industry, designing systems that would manage the fluid dynamics, bringing crude oil, kerosene off boats to trains, trains to trucks, all the way through the distribution supply chain. My junior year at Purdue University, NASA was recruiting, looking for a mechanical engineer with that exact expertise of optimizing the fluid efficiency of a hydroponic system, which is growing crops without soil. Very valuable for space colonization, as we will eventually colonize the moon, the Martian surface. We must be able to grow our own food. But that also presents an immense challenge. These must be very energy efficient. They must be very high yielding and easy to use. And while I fell in love with this possibility of growing just about anything anywhere in absence of any pesticides or preservatives, I also became acutely aware of many technical limitations that have prevented the mass adoption of these technologies. And in my perception, I've really viewed the evolution of this industry like that of the ice industry, as we moved away from these centralized ice factories to decentralized production units at the point of need, that we could develop a very robust business model around that. So filed a series of patents about 8 years ago while I was a student at Purdue University, became a recipient of their venture capital investment fund, and built this business anew today to empower everybody to grow pure produce.
We love to hear it. Thank you so much, Scott. Bart, we'll let you kind of take the floor because I know that people here are interested to hear about what you've done, and kind of a little bit of what's a great way to put it? Not a new cast in the room, so we'll let you take the floor.
Thank you so much, Logan. Very similar to Scott, actually. So about 14 years ago, I was exiting my first startup in the entertainment industry, and I was looking at what I wanted to do, and I was invited to do trends research for a family office in Houston. And I spent a year doing this research on what the family office, and I was associated with it, and what I should be looking for. And the very first report I came across was from Chase Manhattan Bank talking about disruptive sectors for investment. Now, this is in 2014. And at the top of the list was farming. And I wanted to understand, how farming could be a major disruptive sector when we were feeding more people than the sum total of human history, and we all eat better than the Chinese and Roman emperors. And that began my journey, that essentially I came to learn that our farming systems were unsustainable. Just the bare fact of not having enough arable land. By 2050, we would need 1 billion hectares of arable land to continue farming the way that we had been. That's a landmass the size of Canada or Brazil. It simply didn't exist. And then the further I dug, when you get into the demographics, the cycles of history, the changes in the environment, whether man-made or natural, both of those were contributing to a crisis point that I saw that we were going to enter into the future. And so my first analysis was, to sell everything and leave the city. But then I looked deeper at that and I said, well, that's really not a solution. That's a tenable solution for everyone. So then I set out to try to understand what would be the most advanced farming modalities that could be leveraged ahead of this crisis. And that was what led me to create Eden Grow Systems. And at Eden, what fundamentally made us different than other indoor farming companies was that we were asking a completely different question, which is actually, again, much more in line with what Scott said his own conclusion was, which was the industry was asking the question, how do you make the more profitable farm? And when you ask that question, the whole industry adopted a very narrow view, in my opinion, of centralized in a population center, doing succession harvesting, growing leafy greens for maximum profitability. And when I looked at that, I said, well, that's just one aspect along an entire spectrum of need. And that the spectrum of need covered everything from the homesteader to the military base to the luxury hotel to the island nation. And I said, instead of asking the question, how do you build the more profitable farm, the correct question is, how do you build a farming system that's designed to operate at the end of the supply chain, can go the longest amount of time without resupply, can be built and operated by people with no prior experience, and used the least amount of human and electrical energy to accomplish its function? When you ask that question, you end up with a completely different answer. But see, that answer satisfies the answer of the big profit farm in the center of the city. But essentially, our answer was, you have to build farming systems that are modular, mobile, scalable, adaptable. This is what then led me to NASA and developing our relationship with NASA, because I essentially saw, we are an official NASA spinoff company. What I saw was that the questions being asked for off-world, not colonization, it's an ugly word, off-world settlement, deployment of humanity, was asking the same question. How do you build a farming system that could be the most proficient and efficient farming system possible? And so that led us off into this entire journey now that we've been on for 7 years, or 8 years now. And very excitingly, we've been developing relationships with the U.S. Air Force, with the Space Force. We've deployed our systems in the largest food desert in Texas, Precinct 2 in Houston, to show how these systems can be deployed into any point and maximized for creating food abundance and prosperity in that point. I also founded my charity, which is called Feed the Future, that develops the community partnerships that allow us to deploy these systems.
That's incredible, Bart. So I'm one of those people, when I enter a room, if somebody says, do you want to hear the good news first or the bad news first? I'm going to ask for the bad news first because I want to get it out of the way. So let's talk problems first. One of the biggest things, I think, for all of you, each individually, and it's going to be a little bit different, so Scott, I'll start with you first, but how does the application of all of this new technology impact the future, and what threats are you going to face when doing so?
I think when we first accept the conclusion that indoor farming excels when it's decentralized, producing at the point of need, it's a 5 to 10 times difference in gross profitability. The economics work unlike many centralized facilities. I want to make a clear distinction between greenhouses and vertical farms. Greenhouses extend the growing season, vertical farms create the growing season. There is no external dependency. But that also means there's a great deal of energy consumption, creating the lighting, the HVAC environmental control to actually power and create these growing conditions needed to farm. What we've developed is a unique solution called rotary aeroponics. If you can envision a rotisserie cooking system, but in this case a cultivation system, where we rotate a vertical growing tower about fewer grow lights, which use less energy, and most importantly, emit less heat inside the chamber. You hear a great deal of talk about lighting, power consumption being one of the greatest limiting factors in indoor farming. It is one of them, but realistically, it is the thermodynamic heat management. Just like a data center, these lights get very hot. Heat can stunt the growth of plants, cause bolting. It is a photosynthesis blocker, and so it is much a thermodynamic measure of efficiency as it is the lighting efficiency. When you develop a solution as we have that addresses those key challenges, then you can focus on the user experience. And where we've really identified ourselves in our business model is the consumable supply partner. I oftentimes make the analogy to Keurig, but for food. What we have developed is a self-nurturing seed pod, one that contains all of the necessary nutrients. The operator is only required to put the pod in and take the plant out. The Department of Defense has been exploring this concept for decades of developing container farms to reduce their logistical burden, and consistently they come to the same conclusion. If you are able to address the energy and efficiency issues, the labor complexity is what ultimately derails these system experiences. So we've developed a system that's so easy to use, even a child can do it, which fits very well into our market segment of schools and hospitals as we support these food as medicine programs, and leveraging what artificial intelligence can do to automate these growing conditions so it truly is a hands-off experience.
I think it's definitely something to note for people to understand that you're trying to make this easy for people. You're not trying to make this something that's a goal that's so unattainable that sounds like a pipe dream. You're trying to make it easy for people, which kind of leads me into you, David. I know that that's something that you were talking about heavily, is making it easy for the rancher. One of the biggest problems that ranches face these days, and that we as a population face right now, is that there's not enough cattle to feed all of us. It's one of the biggest things that we're going to face right now, and whether we like to admit it or not, we have to eat. Whether you're eating produce or you're eating beef, it doesn't matter. There's not necessarily enough right now for us to all be able to do it. So one of the things that I want to make sure that you hit on today is this isn't necessarily a problem for you, but it's a problem that you're addressing for people that you work with. So I want you to kind of touch on that a little bit.
So what Logan's talking about is our population has grown 120% since the early 50s. Our supply of cattle right now is back at where it was in the early 50s. We are way low on cattle. We need more in here. In terms of making it easy for the ranchers, what we're doing is, you think about the typical rancher who says, it's the way my daddy did it and the way his daddy did it. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. We're not trying to change those guys. I'm not going to recruit them. There are a number of ranchers out there who already realize the benefits of this regenerative ranching. Make the soil better. It'll produce more vegetation. I don't have to buy as much feed. My cattle will eat that, so I'm saving input costs. I'm creating healthier beef. I can hold more cattle on the land, so I'm spreading fixed costs over more animal units. So now I'm showing how those operations can really help them out, but they don't know where to start. And so, for instance, we have a rancher out in West Texas, and when we get him up and running, his neighbors come and ask and say, I see what you're doing. what's going on. He will be able to pull up his P&L and show them, look how much better off I am. Then he can pull up the data. We will have all the ranches networked with hardware to track the health of soil, plants, and animals. So we can say, look, I've got the data to get you up and running even quicker than me. And then we've got HighGround ranch developers that can bring you the equity. So we model in everything: equipment, infrastructure, the cattle itself. We don't want the rancher to take on any upfront risk. We're taking all that on. And so that's where we're thinking we want to lower the barriers to that next group. This is triage. I'm working, first of all, with the folks who want to change, and they're ready to change, and they're already doing it. Secondly, I want to work with those folks who are saying, I think I'd like to, but I don't know how. The last group that says, that's the way my daddy did it and his daddy, I got to let them make their own decision when it's time.
My granddad should have met you. But one of the things I think that's really cool for people to understand too is again, you're making this very, very easy. You're making this attainable. You're making this actually reachable for people to be able to change their ranching practices. Bart, I kind of want you to be able to talk on some of the threats that you face and some of the threats that people that you work with are facing.
They're everywhere. But what do you, when you ask that question, can you be a little more specific?
Most definitely. I think the technology threat and the capital threat are probably two of the biggest that people have to face.
All right. Well, yeah. Right now, I would say indoor farming is in the trough of disillusionment. There's a term in business called the Gartner hype cycle, if I'm butchering that, which is think the internet, Bitcoin, now AI, essentially and indoor farming. Anytime a new technology gets leveraged, what happens is the public and the industry chooses a handful of leaders. In this case, in indoor farming, it was the massive facility in the center of the city. That model always ends up being wrong and almost tanks the entire industry. But the 10% of companies that come after that correctly identified the fault lines in the industry are the companies that go on and become the Googles and the YouTubes and everything else. So, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we were looking at even up to about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we were still looking at articles that were saying, like, is indoor farming even truly viable? Because so many people had gotten burned, so much money had been thrown at it, and so much failure had happened. But no, now I think we're in the really exciting moment where the companies that have correctly identified the faults and had the staying power are now going to move forward. So I think that we're in the valley of tears, the death valley right now, but for those of us that are strong enough to make it out of here, we will create the new foundation. Now the larger question, which I could pontificate on for hours, is the question of technology in our time, which I actually feel is the most central question of our time. Will technology be used to vertically integrate and create greater economies of scale, or will it be utilized to empower the human individual? And I look at it, I literally call it the great question, and I say that every aspect of the choices we have to make into the future really are delineated along those lines. Is this leading towards more human future? Is this leading towards more humanity, freedom, our children growing up living in the kind of world that we grew up in, or is it leading towards something else? Just trying to keep it brief, if you look at the acceleration of technology from the industrial age to the computer age, from the computer age to the internet age, from the internet age to the social media age, now from social media, it's halving. It goes 80, 40, 20, 10. We are now in the middle of the 10-year horizon. Next will probably be the robotics, which will be the 5-year horizon. Then it's 2, then it's 1. Like, we are racing towards the singularity, or what I call the Atlantean moment. And so truly, it's really the only question now. Like, we're answering specific aspects of that question. But, I'll end it with this comment. If we abandon the choice of the future to the powerful, look at what Walmart and Dollar General have done to small town America. That is what AI and robotics are going to do to the soul of humanity. It will give every cheap bauble and take every real fundamental at the same time. And so anytime someone gives me an opportunity to talk to that subject, I make that point, because we have to understand that it's just going to continue to accelerating. The panel before us said, we're in a moment of crises. The moment of crises is never going to end. It's actually just going to keep force multiplying, which is why decentralized solutions like this are the only answer. And finally, decentralized solutions that must be owned by the people. We cannot create decentralized 15-minute cities that are owned by corporations and the government or any kind of regulatory body. It must be owned by the people in the communities that live inside of them. Otherwise, you'll just end up in futuristic, pretty-looking gulags.
Let me add something real quick to that, because we are connected to two people in the military, two majors in the Army, who got approval from the Secretary of the Navy to begin regenerative ranching on one of the military bases. The DoD owns 27 million acres of land, and the land around the bases is unhealthy, so the troops are at higher risk of fire and floods. These guys want to ranch that for national defense purposes, take down the risk of fire and floods, feed the high-quality beef to those people, to the troops. And one of the reasons that they're doing this is they also want to address the food supply chain. And they say one of the biggest threats is centralized food systems. They're at risk of physical and cyber attacks.
And I think I would even add to the greatest threat I see is the threat on our health. Today, according to the American Heart Association, our country spends just about $4 trillion a year battling diet-related chronic disease, diabetes, cardiovascular. That is an order of magnitude larger than the whole food economy combined. So for some reason, the whole health system has everything to do with food, yet food has very little to do with the health system. What we have found is a great ally in this fight for our health is working with healthcare facilities. We are partially funded by health insurance entities which are embracing this concept of produce prescriptions. They want us to be healthier. They don't want to process unnecessary claims. That's not good for their bottom line. They want to see a reckoning in our health. And truly embracing food as medicine, producing closer to that point of need, maximizes that nutritional value, the antioxidants, the secondary nutrients, which is clinically shown to have health benefits, can dramatically reduce the risk factors of these health conditions. And through some of our healthcare partners, we found astonishing cost savings that for employers who are able to see reversals in type 2 diabetes of their employees, that can be upwards of $27,000 a year in savings for the individual. So when we can truly look at this as an investment in health beyond a commodity food production, the economic model profoundly changes in the cost savings.
So while we're kind of on the topic of basically threat and then into the solution of it, so what new market channels does this present?
For us specifically, it's licensing. Our business model has 3 primary components. We partner with existing hardware manufacturers. That could be a residential household appliance brand or an equipment manufacturer. Think of it like Intel Inside. These are groups that want to participate in this market of at-source CEA, yet lack maybe the plant science and environmental control expertise to have a winning solution that would otherwise take 5-10 years to develop internally. So that rapidly establishes scale and creates demand for the seed pod consumables. I think it's really important that we recognize that while we can provide design leadership with hardware, we are not a hardware manufacturer. We focus more so on the optimized biology of the seed pods produced inside of the system and the operating software. Think of that like your Windows OS for the actual devices themselves that couple cameras with environmental sensors to ensure very consistent and precise growth outcomes.
That's fantastic. David, one of the things that you and I were talking about when we were on the phone is soil, specifically, making soil better, focusing on the soil part of farming. What is that solution for people? What is the way to make that growth actually attainable for folks and something that it continues not to destroy soil, but we actually have soil that functions for us?
Let me answer that by answering one of your questions earlier about technology. And the challenge for me with technology is perception. So Silicon Valley has spent, 6 decades plus becoming successful showing you that that you need to create the next great machine, the next great software, now more recently the next great biotech. We are totally natural. We're going back 150 years first to let nature work the way it's supposed to, and then we'll apply technology to that where it works. So people, when they hear what we're doing, and everyone agrees we need to be natural, when you see how natural we are, we're using animals to improve the soil. We're not using any fancy machines. We're using animals to sequester carbon, improve soil biodiversity. We're not using machines, so that's the biggest challenge, that we have. But that's where we believe that the soil, I call it soil farming. Focus first of all on making that soil healthier. That we believe that that's where it'll produce more vegetation. That's what leads to to more profitability for our ranchers. I don't know, did I answer your question? I got off track on the technology. I was on a soapbox for that.
No, you're totally fine. So yes, you did answer the question. So making sure that we can focus on actually having quality soil is one of the biggest takeaways. Bart, I see your wheels kind of spinning over there and turning a little bit. Do you have something to add on this?
Well, sure. It's a fascinating dichotomy between the two of them, and I think that that was where my own conclusions have come, is that the future of farming is going to be taking traditional, heritage type farming practices and combining it with future tech. That's the sweet spot. For a long time I was an aeroponic purist, but now at this point, what I really see is the farms that I want to build in the future, even though we have our own product line that we put out, our aeroponic towers, those systems I really see as being more utilized for research, community development, and education. But if you're talking about building like the most highly proficient farms, it goes all the way back or currently to the work that we're working on to build the Mars analog with Space Center Houston and NASA, which is, all of the tech that came out of indoor farming in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s from NASA was really just the question of, could we grow something indoors? And that's where indoor farming comes. The Mars analog and the BLISS, the bioregenerative life support system, that's the next step, which is how do you make a closed loop bioregenerative farming system? And when you start to dig into that, what you discover is the limitations of the technology that you really want to do aquaponics, aeroponics, hydroponics, soil, and incorporating, the livestock, bioregenerative principles, in the soil as well. And that's the closed-looped system, because there's inputs and outputs in every aspect of those systems that then can augment the other systems. And so that's the next layer of research that is currently like at the very forefront of what I would say next generation ag, and that's where I think it really starts to get exciting. Is how do we combine what the both of you are doing and create the next system that incorporates each of those modalities?
Fantastic analysis. I would love to, since we've got a little shy of 10 minutes left in this panel, I would love to open it up for any questions that the audience may have. That was quick.
Scott, got a question for you. Have a question for you, Scott. I love your technology that you described, and I'm a little bit familiar with the new. But I'm told that in the soil there are 90 different microelements in the soil, and are you duplicating those 90 different elements in your system to feed that plant all of the elements that we're currently getting from the soil, if it's a healthy soil?
Yes. And I would even take that a little bit further. We're doing extensive analysis of the nutritional content of the vegetables themselves. Within each of our growth chambers in our headquarters, we isolate different variables: high humidity, low humidity, certain light spectrum intensities, which was a big focus of our research at NASA, which is proven to maximize certain secondary nutrients. So all the way down to the human consumption of those nutritional values. And what we do is compare that nutritional value with the images to train the AI algorithm what that value of the nutritional concentrations are. If I make an analogy, it's like having a Polaroid camera that prints a food nutrition label for the food that you're about to consume.
Good answer. So you and I need to talk. I represent the state of Iowa. I'm not the governor, but quite frankly, I'm getting more done than what she is. I say that humbly, because I'm working at the grassroots ground level, and I'm working with all of those communities that you just mentioned, Bart, that our communities, we've destroyed the small communities in Iowa. And we import 90% of the food that we consume from California or Mexico or China or wherever, which is why there's no nutrition in our food by the time it hits our plates, and it's why we are number 2 in cancer in the country. We're 100% agriculture, the only state left still doing that. From the Mississippi to the Missouri, that's what happens. We've got 80,000 farmers all doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons. And by the way, David, I got a place for you to play in Iowa as well, and Colorado and California, because we can help you put. Pardon?
I like to play.
Cool. So I'm going to invite you all back. We do the World Food Prize every year. I'm meeting with the chairman of the board. And what's your question? My question is, how do we bring you two together? Because you both have answers. And Bart, I want him standing beside me. But Iowa is ground zero because we started industrial ag. We have to fix it. If we don't fix it where it got started, we're never going to get to where we want to go. So Iowa's ground zero. Denver, Colorado is the epicenter. I'm working very closely with the National Western Center, and I apologize if I'm doing an advertising thing here. But anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. I want to bring you back to Iowa. If we can fix Iowa, we can fix the entire country, because once again, it all started there. So thank you for what you're doing, all three of you. Thank you for what you're doing, and there's a place for you in Iowa and everywhere.
Do we have another question, I think, right over here for our panelists? Right back here? Okay, we got it. And we'll come to you next, James.
Thank you so much. This one's kind of specifically for David, but I'd love everyone's input. So I know beef is very much under attack right now about it's not the most efficient form of livestock and all of that. I'd love to know if that's kind of been a challenge. And then my other question is does your approach work pretty well with other forms of livestock? I mean, poultry and hogs and pigs and that kind of thing. How does it translate over to those kind of livestock?
Well, to answer your second question first, that's ideal. Yeah, it's multiple animals, multiple kinds of hooves, pigs, donkeys, variety of that. And a lot of the problem can be fixed with just animals, but it's better to have some produce, some other plants and things involved too. Yeah, our challenge is that 90% plus of the beef we eat comes from the industrial type of system, and that's the type of system that is bad for the environment. It's net bad for the soil, the carbon, everything. What we do is net good. We're a net carbon sink. We can double up our herd size, and still, by the way we are grazing them, still net sequestering carbon. So one more thing about that while I'm thinking of it, just to do some quick math. I can guarantee it's wrong, but try to keep up with me here. I think we have 600 million acres that we are ranching, that we allocated to ranching. If we only work on a third of that, improving that, 200 million acres. Think about how I can now double up my herd size, so I've now freed up 200 million acres for growing more food, now that I have the animals on one piece of land. They also use somewhere around 220 million acres to grow food to feed the animals. Well, I use 75 to 80% less feed. So now think of that piece that is now being freed up too. We're opening up somewhere around, 250 million acres for growing additional food?
All right, we got time for one more question right here.
Yeah, Jim Hansen, also with HighGround Ranch Developers. And Scott, I find it prescient this morning that he just happened to accidentally sit next to me. And we were talking, and Bart, I so respect what you're talking about, the inputs of one process being the inputs that are needed for another process. And the symbiosis between the two completes that cycle. And that's exactly what Scott and I briefly discussed this morning. So I'm going to put both you and David on the spot and say, well, how can we work together, the farmers that are producing in these new methods and the ranchers that are using these new methods, of traditional methods. So there you go, guys. Go for it.
Give us money. No, I'd say projects. The more community projects that we can leverage and show, like what Scott was saying, that this is profitable. So much of I've never even approached impact investing, but impact investing ended up being a waste, and it's poisoned a lot of the soil for us to grow in now, because people have so many doubts about, can this make money? So I think that's where we have to focus is we know the science is there. We are all living it, but now showing the public that it's leverageable and leverageable at scale, that's what I see as our work being.
I do definitely view this as a symphony of solutions. Now, full disclosure, I'm quite removed from the ranching lifestyle, but I can very much appreciate the preservation of soil as a whole. We go to great lengths to develop a compostable plant-based resin seed pod that leaves zero plastic pollution. It will fully disintegrate within 1 year, completely eliminating what I also view as another critical health threat, microplastics in our soil and food supply chain. And by localizing food production, we eliminate the overproduction that takes place. For certain vegetables, we're overproducing by a factor of 3 just to account for the shrinkage and the supply chain losses from what's not picked in the field, what doesn't make it through the supply chain, what the grocer decides is ugly, and what the consumer doesn't eat. Just producing locally reduces that overproduction by a massive margin, while then freeing up that land for other positive use cases such as ranching or other regenerative farming practices.
We're an ideal complement. We talked about this. They're urban, I'm rural. I can't ranch 2,000 cattle in Manhattan. They can, and what they're doing with their produce can be a lot more efficient in places like that. So we're a good fit. Later today, Shondor Habsburg and Jacob Uhlencut will be talking. They do something similar, but even more broad. They have contained systems that grow produce, proteins, fish, nuts, mushrooms, all kinds of things. So we've talked with them about how do they set up what they're doing here in the States, and then we put the ranching around it.
Hell yeah. There you go. Kind of like target agriculture, if you ask me.
Well, gentlemen, every single person in this room thanks you for being here and sharing your knowledge and sharing your perspective. Make sure you shake hands, make sure you collaborate, make sure you start business. And as David said it best, let's get to playing. So thank you all.